Hello, you're listening to the 200th episode of Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm sharing all about my experience attending my first ever fan convention, LA Comic Con. I've been to other conventions before. I've been to a writing convention, a social media convention, but this was my first time ever attending a fan convention. I've been wanting to do that for years now, and this just had worked out. The timing of it was just perfect because I had heard about it the day before I decided to go. And I was like, oh, this seems like so much fun. I'm going to go. So it was kind of like a spur of the moment thing. And it just was an absolute blast. I can't wait to go to my next fan convention. And it was just so much fun. So I'm so happy it just worked out that I was able to go. And if you've been to fan conventions before, I'm sure you know how much what an absolute joy they are. You get to meet beloved people from, just beloved shows, movies, whether it's actors, artists. There's lots of cool stuff, of course, you can buy. So many great panels, and of course the cosplay. Some absolutely amazing costumes that people create all on their own. They make with their own, handmade stuff. I think that's so amazing. I'm so impressed by people's talent and passion for all of these things. And so I'm glad that with LA Comic Con, I was going into it thinking, okay, I'll just kind of just see where the day takes me. I didn't really have an agenda in mind because there was a schedule. I was like, okay, well, there are certain things I want to check out, but if anything, I'll just kind of see where, what I'm going to do for the whole day and really just not have a schedule in mind, just see what happens. So when I got there, I first was like, okay, let me just kind of take it all in. And it was crowded and it was crowded, but at the same time, I'm sure, it must be a fraction of the biggest, fan convention, of course, San Diego Comic-Con. That must be the behemoth of them all, the beast of all the fan conventions out there. But I like that it was, yes, it was crowded and stuff, but it was manageable. It wasn't, overwhelming in that sense, in my opinion. I was able to, navigate the floors relatively easily, find where I wanted to go for certain panels, so it just all worked out. So that made it more enjoyable, too, to not be so, being oh, can I figure out where to go, and, just kind of do things on my own. Because I just went by myself, and I've seen a lot of people, they were just I saw, there were definitely couples, there were families, parents with their kids, there were, big groups, too, but a lot of people just on their own, too, that I noticed here and there, just, doing their own thing, which is great, too. So the first panel I went to was actually the fan fiction panel, where one of the moderators, or one of the panelists, was Betsy Rosenblatt, who I interviewed on this podcast. Then I had the pleasure of chatting with her one-on-one. And so I actually arrived a little late. I was like, oh shoot, I gotta, just slip in, but it was all good once I was seated, just enjoying the panel. And that was a really informative panel because I still love fan fiction to this day, even though I don't write it as much as I used to, but I've been writing it on and off since I was 11 years old. So over 20 years now, which is crazy. And I did share the latest fanfic I wrote, which was Through Hope, my Hey Arnold fanfic, which I wrote as a result of, it really started from my own grief after the loss of our cat, her just having to put her to sleep. Very, very tragic, just very heartbreaking. And so as a result of that, then I needed I just needed to take away my grief. And so what helped was rewatching Hey Arnold. It truly is one of the best shows. I can't say that enough about Hey Arnold. It's a beautiful, beautiful show, and it's so, so soul-nourishing, in my opinion. And so then as a result of that, then I got to thinking about Arnold and Helga, and so that story came about. So the panel was a lot of fun, and then I spoke to Betsy afterward. I'd be like, oh, I'd love to interview you, and then got her email, and then I was able to connect with her, and I had her on the podcast, and I'm so, I really enjoyed that conversation. I learned a lot. It was absolutely wonderful. And so then after that panel, I went to the main hall of the convention. And so when I got there first, it's so funny because I was just kind of figuring out where to go exactly and figuring out where the floors are in terms of, okay, so how do I get to this specific room for this panel? So I figured that out. And then just like the flow of traffic, like people all going one way, people all going another way, and everyone like in their costumes, like not everyone, but like the majority of people in costumes, which was so great. At one point I passed by a whole big group of people dressed as various superheroes, all taking a photo together. I'm telling you, people go all out and it's incredible. I can't be understated, like, how amazing people are with their cosplay. Again, I just have to say that. So then I went to the main stage, which is where they had some of the bigger panels. And so the first one I saw was the 20th anniversary panel for Jimmy Neutron. I haven't discussed that show yet. The Adventures of Jimmy Neutron, Boy Genius. That is the full title of that series. But I loved the movie when it came out back in 2001. I loved the series. And so I got to talk about that show at one point, because I know that's another show that fans want to see a revival of in some way. And I'm telling you, it was the majority of the voice actors, except for Libby. That voice actress wasn't there. So what they did was they just auditioned some people in the audience. And I'm telling you, this one girl that they chose to just like sit in as the voice of Libby, she didn't sound like her, but like she had like the attitude and mannerisms down as Libby, if that makes sense. And I was like, damn, she's like really good. I think she could have a future in voice acting or just in acting, that girl. So like props to her. She did a really excellent job. She just like had the like Libby spirit. It was just really good. And so what was funny is that the panel was moderated by Mark DiCarlo, who is the voice of Hugh Neutron, who is a fan favorite of the Jimmy Neutron fandom. And so he had a shirt that looked like Hugh's shirt, like the blue sweater and the red ties. That was great. And I'm telling you, they fell back into their roles like that. Like, it was so amazing. Seeing, of course, Rob Paulsen, who voices Carl Wheezer, and Debbie Derryberry, who voices Jimmy Neutron, and also Carolyn Lawrence, who voices Cindy Vortex, and most notably, she's the voice of Sandy Cheeks from SpongeBob SquarePants, and also Jeff Garcia, who voices Sheen. I was like, oh my God, amazing. So we were just like watching them read a Jimmy Neutron script in real time, like, just performing it for us and for the audience. And they did the episode Lights, Camera, Danger, which is when Jimmy writes a screenplay and then they get to act in it with this guy, Quentin Smithy, and then it turns out to be Professor Calamitous in disguise. So if you recall that episode, it's when Hugh is like, oh, I'll be Donut Boy, like so stupid, thinking he's part of the movie. And then Carl has that iconic line, and so funny, Rob Paulsen, before he said the line, he's like, your phone's out, this is it. And he's like, are you going to finish that croissant? Like that line, And obviously the delivery is so, I'm like cracking up just thinking of it. Oh my God. And like Sheen too is so hilarious. Like, that show, it really is so funny and really well written, like great show. I'm excited. I'll have to revisit that show because really good show and like such solid script, and like the actors are fantastic. So I loved all that. Like when Professor Calamitous is trying to like kill them all basically. Like, oh my God, jeez, crazy. But it was so good. And so before the actual, before they were doing a read through of the episode, and they had also like episode images to go along with it. And then they had like clips here and there, like when the characters were dancing, like just like some parts here and there that like filled in the gaps from when they were, reading their lines, like performing. So before that though, Mark DiCarlo asked if anyone could do a Hugh Neutron impression. So a few people tried out. And then the one person they picked, he did a really, really good job. He like really sounded like Hugh, like with, the way Hugh Neutron speaks, like like that dopey dad. He's so funny. So then the guy came on stage and he did a scene with the woman who voices Judy Neutron. Her name is like Megan Cavanagh. And oh my God, so they did the scene when, if you recall the Jimmy Neutron, the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour, when Judy is saying, like, she thinks she's Mighty Mom, and then Hugh at one point is like, oh, I get it, this is one of your special games, and we all lost it. I forgot about that, and it was so funny. Oh my God, he's like, okay, well, I'll get into my spandex. I was like, oh my God, like, props to him, he did an excellent job as Hugh. It was so funny. He's like, you were playing one of those special games. Like, it was just hilarious. Oh my God, it was so funny. Oh my God. So that was such a fun panel. Afterwards, they did a whole little Q&A. At one point, someone asked, like, oh, do you, like, they asked, I don't know, it was like a random question. Like, someone asked Rob, like, as Carl, he's like, oh, do you hurt yourself when you eat a croissant? And then he's like, well, and like as Carl, he's like, well, sometimes I just like beat the Christ out of myself when I have a croissant or something. Like, I was like, what is he talking about? Hysterical though, I don't know. And they were talking about how they would do a lot of improv on the show. So they would do the script as is for one take, then the second take they would just do what they called the crazy pass, and they got to record together, which helped with like the spontaneity and the chemistry of the cast, which isn't always the case, especially nowadays, but only certain shows they would do that. I know for a fact Invader Zim, they would do that as well, which obviously makes a difference, I would think. Obviously, they can do it on their own, like when they more often than not, they have to record separately, depending on schedules and everything, especially on movies. Forget that, everyone's separate. But when they can be together, obviously that like helps with the spontaneity and like with the creativeness and like the fun for them. It must be so much fun. So it was a blast. And then also Candy Milo was there. She was filling in as like the Quentin Smithies guy. Smithy? I already forget his name. So Quentin Smithy. And because she also voiced Nick, you know, that cool guy Nick, quote unquote cool, who's not cool at all really, but you know, he's too funny. So like that was just so much fun. I think she also, oh no, actually Megan Kavanaugh just filled in as Professor Calamitous. So she was doing like a nasally voice because he was voiced originally by Tim Curry. So that's just too funny. That, I'm telling you, that panel was just so much fun. And most of us were standing, though. We had to stand, but it was just like a whole big group of fans that just gathered together to enjoy that panel. It was so much fun. And so then the panel after that, and I'm pretty sure you could find it on YouTube. I'm sure you could find the panel on YouTube, at least maybe the reading of the script, because it was so good. And then they did a Q&A. It was fantastic. So here's hoping for more Jimmy Neutron. After all that, I was like, I want to see more Jimmy Neutron now. Too funny. So the panel after that then was a Q&A with Tom Kenny. And Tom Kenny is, you know, he's so talented. He's so full of joy. And it was just a great panel. It was moderated by Hector Navarro. I remember he used to do he was the host of the Nicktoons podcast. I still like the Nickelodeon Animation podcast, rather. I still miss that podcast. I hope that comes back someday, but who knows? Because I think now he co-hosts a SpongeBob SquarePants podcast with Frankie Grande, if I'm not mistaken. So that's pretty cool. So then there was just a Q&A with Tom Kenny. And he's also in a band as well. Like they were saying how he was going to be performing that night. Tom Kenny Band, I think it's called. So that's really cool. They have like 60s inspired music. So that's a lot of fun. And I'm telling, and like at one point he was just like walking around. He's like, oh, I didn't know he could stand up. Like he's just too funny. And he did like a whole on the spot thing as he was like the citizens of like LA Comic-Con. He was like doing that, and like with, you know, the narrator of Powerpuff Girls, then the mayor and SpongeBob like all meeting. He's like, oh, SpongeBob, can you help me with this pickle jar? And then SpongeBob, like, it was too funny. It was pretty good. I'm telling you, he's so good, obviously, because he started out like in stand-up and improv, so he has like that background. Again, like, you know, again, can't be said enough. He's so talented and such a joy. So that was a lot of fun too. Seeing him in person, it was just cool. It's like, oh, Tom Kenny. Like, oh man, it was a lot of fun. And then the panel after that was Steve Burns, aka Steve from Blue's Clues. And I'm telling you, the moment he stepped out, I immediately teared up. I was like, oh, Steve. And he is just as kind-hearted and wonderful as you would hope he would be. He basically is kind of like the Fred Rogers, you know, Mr. Rogers of our generation. Anyone who grew up watching Blue's Clues, you know how special that show is. And I'm sure you saw a year ago about when it was the 25th anniversary of Blue's Clues. So yeah, it was in 2021. That viral video of Steve stepping in and being like, hello, and like, I'm here for you. I'm so proud of you. Look how far you've come. And I'm getting misty-eyed just thinking of that. He had said that he did that. The first time he did that video, he cried. And the second time, it made everyone else cry. So that's so sweet. And oh my gosh, it was just another really wonderful conversation with the panelist, with the moderator, and Steve, just sharing about getting his start, like, starting on Blue's Clues, and how at first he had to kind of change his look because he used to have long hair and piercings and stuff. And then at the network apparently had said he was like not conventionally handsome, and we all collectively groaned at that. We were all like, what? Like, how dare you? But like, he had a good sense of humor about it. And then he was saying how for him it was just like a very intimate thing of being with the crew, and like you had like this blue screen, you're just like working all day, and he first thought it was like a game show. He didn't really know what it was about, the show. And he had said too that a big reason, like, for him connecting with the character of Steve on Blue's Clues, he says, like, there's nothing wrong with asking someone for help. Like, he says, like, when he goes up to the camera asking you for help, like, will you help me? He says that that's a good thing, and that's kind of like the first step sometimes. Because he did talk a little bit about struggling with depression, and what he said that in his life, it's never about, like, what you can't run from it, or you can't pretend it's not there. You have to face it. So whatever that means for you, whether that's seeking therapy, whether that's just taking time for yourself, like stuff like that. So that was just, another nurturing, wonderful thing about connection and being there for someone and taking care of yourself. And so that was just really poignant and really moving, and something that we just need to be reminded of. So that was just very powerful. And I love Steve, my goodness. And a lot of people were dressed up as Steve. They had the classic green striped shirt. There was one guy, he was dressed as Steve, and then his girlfriend was dressed as Blue. And I was like, oh, adorable costume, I told them, because I was like, wow, it's such a cute costume. One person even had, which took me back because I definitely had one when I was a kid. It was a little Blue plushie, as in, Blue the puppy. And if you recall that plushie, like that specific plushie, the two paws like connected together with magnets. And that took me back. I was like, oh man, I had that plushie back in the day. I was like, wow, that person still has it. That's amazing. Someone also had their handy dandy notebook. Steve shared actually that he didn't actually draw the stuff. He would try to early on, but then like he said that it was actually artists doing that. So, shared a little production stuff with that. So that was cute. So I'm telling you, it was amazing seeing Steve in person. Oh my goodness. So sweet. And so then after that, I went to an adult animation panel, which was with Aaron Long, who I spoke with on this podcast a couple years ago. He is the creator of Sublo and Tangy Mustard. He directed a bunch of episodes of BoJack Horseman, as well as Tuca and Birdie. And then I also spoke to Mike Hollingsworth, who I also chatted with on this podcast. Or he was also on the panel, rather, but I spoke to him afterwards to ask him to be on the podcast. So also Amy Winfrey was there, who directed a bunch of episodes of BoJack, a couple of other people. I'm just focused on the BoJack Horseman people because that's just one of my all-time favorite series, as you know. So that was a lot of fun about the in and outs of the animation industry and where it's headed with adult animation, stuff like that. I also at one point got food before that too, just saying. And, even though things were crowded, like I said, but again, not too bad. Even just waiting for food, it was no big deal. People are just very nice. They were just I don't know, very polite and just having a good time, It was just so much fun being there. Probably also because it hadn't been for a couple of years, I assume, because with the pandemic. So probably that was the first one back since then. But it was just, again, so much fun. So I really loved that adult animation panel. And then afterward, I also just kind of walked the floors too. And obviously there are so many vendors, so much cool stuff you can buy. A lot of Funko Pops, I noticed. A lot of cool t-shirts. A lot of really fun stuff. I treated myself to, there were these mystery boxes of all these different shows and stuff. So I treated myself to a Nickelodeon one. I was like, oh, I love my 90s Nick stuff. I gotta get that. And it was some cool stuff, but the majority of it was SpongeBob SquarePants items, to be honest. One thing that's cool was that I have a spatula now, my own, Krusty Krab spatula, which is cool. But there was a couple of other things too, which was nice. So that was just a fun thing to go through. I also have a Reptar cereal bowl, which is cute. I have also a Gurr, kind of a lanyard thing, what you get with the tags, when you get those, which I have to my LA Comic Con ones, a Gurr one, with the band and then with the Gurr hanging off of it. So that's cute too. That was a lot of fun. And obviously, like, then there were all like these signings. You can get autographs, like the stuff you have to pay for beforehand, though. And you can meet like the voice actors and everything. And so then I decided I had to get a picture with Steve. And he had the longest line. Like, everyone was like, oh, who, like, you're waiting for a line for this person? It's like, oh, it's Steve Burns, you know? And at one point, I was chatting with a girl who was dressed as Doug Dimmadome from Fairly Odd Parents. And she had, like, you know, the nearly 10-foot hat, whatever, like 5-foot hat. I was like, damn, that's impressive. And a couple of people just went up to her asking for a picture. I asked her, like, oh, is it bothering you at all, the hat? She's like, no, just kind of the rubber bands I have, like the string underneath it is like kind of hurting my neck a little bit now. I was like, oh, geez, I bet. And I told her before I had seen a little boy dressed up as Timmy Turner. He had the pink shirt and the pink hat, and he had a pink and green balloon with Cosmo and Wanda faces on it. And she was like, oh, that's great. I wish I had seen that. I saw someone dressed up as Tina Belcher. She even had her friend fiction notebook. That was really great. And I was, you know, it was just so many really creative, cool cosplay again. I caught then the tail end of another voice actor panel, and at the end of it they were just singing the 12 Days of Christmas as some of their characters, which was a lot of fun too, because again, this Comic-Con was in December. And so then, like, yeah, I was just walking the floors and stuff and looking at all the people's cool artwork, a lot of amazing artwork too, so much, like, you know, a lot of really fun stuff to explore. But then, like, the last thing I did was I got a picture with Steve. So I waited in line. It was like a good hour, maybe a little less than an hour, but it was worth the wait. And that's when I was just chatting with people. I was chatting with this one girl, too, who was a big fan of Steve's music, actually. And his song, too, like, one of his songs is used as the theme song for Young Sheldon, which is really cool, too. So he's also a musician. And so it's too funny. Afterward, like, when we were inside waiting to get our picture, and I was like making a joke like, oh, it's like we're waiting to take a picture with Santa Claus at the mall. And my goodness. And I'm telling you, just meeting Steve, just, it was literally, the entire interaction was 30 seconds at the most, but it brought me so much joy. So he was giving everyone a fist bump. So I gave him a fist bump, took a picture with him. And then I just asked him really quick. I just said, oh, Steve, did you come up with, like, when you say thank you and you do the sign language, was that you or was that producers? And he said, no, that was B. I was like, oh, that's amazing. And then I did thank you, Steve. Like, I did the thank you that he does. And that's it. That was the whole, you know, interaction. But it just was so much fun. And I'm looking at my picture now of me and Steve, and it made me so, so happy. So that was just the perfect way to cap off the day for me. And I had such a blast. And I'm excited to go to my next fan convention because, again, just honestly, pure joy and excitement, and I loved every minute of it. So I look forward to my next one. And with that, that's going to conclude the 200th episode of Storytelling Saga. Just wanted to give a quick thank you so much for tuning into this podcast, whether you've been a fan since the beginning, whether you've recently become a fan, whether you've listened to every single episode or just tune in to your favorites every now and then to whatever topics pique your interest. I thank you so much for listening and continuing to support me on this podcasting journey. Be sure to check out storytellingsaga.com, and as always, feel free to send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by emailing me at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next episode, let's go! I will be discussing the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.